Hey everyone, how are y'all today? Good
I'm
morning.
good. How are you?
Good. Awesome. I'm getting everything set up. So we are super excited today. We have Merrill Taylor joining us to give y'all to answer y'all's 1099 questions and all do all the 1099 things this morning because it's that time. I guess Meryl, if you want to tell them a little bit about you, I think some of them are familiar, but we do have some new faces. A little bit about you to start with, and then are there any new updates that we need to know going into this year, kind of thing?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Merrill Taylor. I've met and know some of you. I'm a CPA, been a CPA for over 20 years now, and preparing tax returns and very focused on the tax side of things. And so I am in Utah, is where I'm based out of, and spent most of my life between Utah and California. So I know both those states fairly well. But yeah, here I'll give an overview of 1099s, but I know there's a lot of questions that pop up around them because there's a lot of
Yep.
nuances that come into them. And so we'll give a general idea of how they work and what they are and what to be mindful of and paying attention to, and then let you ask questions. There haven't been a whole lot of updates on them other than we'll talk a little bit about the 1099K threshold is getting lower. It used to be like $20,000 in volume before a 1099K was issued, and that's getting lower. And that's not something we necessarily have to worry about because 1099Ks are issued by banks and credit card processors and things. But it's for some reason everybody's in like a total meltdown over 1099Ks being issued because I think the issue there is like basically like Venmo transactions would be issued a 1099K, so everybody was concerned about getting 1099Ks for payments between friends and family, but that hasn't happened quite yet. We haven't really seen anything along those lines. I've never seen a client be issued a 1099K for using Venmo or anything. So all right, yeah, I will share my screen. Let me get this going. Okay, let's see. And I'll share the one window. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. And then usually I'm like really interactive. So yeah, feel free to either ask questions in the chat or unmute and just ask them in person. Either way works just fine for me. All right. So the big question is, am I required to file a Form 1099 or other information return? And so, yeah, this is the IRS site on 1099s. It says if you made a payment during the calendar year as a small business or self-employed individual, you're most likely required to file an information return. So that's our first step, is that these have to be related to a business transaction. So I gave an example to a client the other day because they were asking about 1099s and trying to find out if they were supposed to issue one. And I said, okay, if somebody comes and hires me as a CPA to do their personal tax return, that is a personal transaction, and they don't send me a 1099 because they're not going to deduct my payment as part of a business expense or anything. It's just a personal expense. Same thing if you hired like a plumber or someone to come out to your personal home and do something personally for you. You don't send them a 1099 because you're not deducting that payment as a business expense. However, if somebody hires me to prepare a business tax return and when I invoice them, they're going to deduct that invoice as a business expense. That now turns that transaction into a business transaction, and they will need to 1099 me for that sort of thing. So that's our first hurdle is you're not 1099ing people for personal type services. It has to be connected to a business. The other thing is, you make a payment following types of payments. So the $600 is the threshold there. So you have paid at least $600. With the IRS, there's always that distinction. Is it equal to or more than? And so this one, that's an equal to. So equal to $600 or more. And then these are for services that are performed by someone who's not your employee. There's also a rule that you don't 1099 and W-2 the same person out of the same business. And so, yeah, we shouldn't see somebody being both a contractor and an employee. So they're not your employee. And then it gets into like weird nuances like cash payments for fish and then payments to attorneys. So payments to an attorney they are always issued 1099s regardless of whether they're a corporation or not. There's another rule that we'll get into that you don't have to issue a 1099 to anyone that is a corporation. So I happen to be an S corporation. So when somebody asks for my W-9, which we'll get into, I mark on there that I am a corporation, and that is a signal to them that they don't have to 1099 me. Some people still do. I still get 1099s, and that's fine because I do a lot of individual tax returns. So the 1099s I receive during the year are far less than the income I report on my return. And that's really what 1099s are designed to do. They are designed to make sure people are recognizing all the income that they are supposed to be recognizing. It's not so much about the person issuing the 1099s that it's not so much that if you don't issue a 1099, you can't take a deduction. That's actually, that's a common thing that I hear from people saying, if you don't 1099 somebody, you can't deduct it. That's not true. There's no such thing in the tax code that says that an expense is not deductible if a 1099 is not issued. That's like against the tax law, basically. So the enforcement's not so much on the person that issues the 1099, it's more they're trying to enforce the person to recognize the income on a tax return. And the only time you really run into an issue with 1099s is that if you receive 1099s in an amount that's more than you report on your tax return. And so with our clients, they'll usually send us the 1099s that they've received, and then I always just add those up, and I make sure that the amount that's reported on the tax return is at least as much as the 1099 or more than the 1099. And if that ends up being the case, then that's fine. I just ignore 1099s and we don't report them anywhere. They don't go anywhere. It's just making sure that the total 1099s is equal to or less than the amount of income reported on the tax return. Okay. So then, yeah, payments to attorneys. That's good. Okay, so let's see here. Some questions, and yeah, you can jump in there with questions. I don't have like super structure. We'll just generally go through things. So question from Abby, should you issue a 1099 to an employee for work paid for outside of their normal duties, not run through payroll? No, yeah. It says services performed by someone who is not your employee. So you could issue them a 1099 if it was like a whole nother business. They could be an employee of one business and a contractor of another, but they cannot be both an employee and a contractor of the same business at the same time. There can certainly be a transition time where they're an employee in one part of the year and then maybe they become a contractor, or more common, they're a contractor part of the year and then they become an actual employee. So that could be the case there. Yeah, they wouldn't really be doing, and I know that there can be times when they do something different, unless they're doing it through like an LLC or something like that. Yeah, you shouldn't have both W-2 and 1099 for the same person. Let's see, another question. What about when the company sends money to the employee via Venmo as an additional payment, payroll, but not run through the payroll services and the tax? Okay, so that's borderline illegal, yes, right? So not that it's illegal, but that needs to be added to payroll because now they're trying to circumvent payroll and payroll taxes and all that sort of stuff. So however they pay them, Venmo or whatever else, should hit their W-2, should be subject to payroll taxes. The problem is that now that they paid them via Venmo, they haven't withheld the payroll taxes, but that employer is still responsible for those payroll taxes. So now the employer either needs to go back to the employee and take back the employee's portion of the payroll taxes, or the employer's got to pay both the employee and the employer portion of the payroll taxes. But here's the tricky part, is if that employer pays the employee's portion of the payroll taxes, that ends up being treated as additional compensation to the employee because now the employee is getting that in addition, and it turns into the circular type of thing where they constantly do that. Yeah, so it's always best to do things the right way up front. So thanks for those questions. Let me know any other questions. Oh, there's another one. A business owner has multiple businesses and paid a vendor from wrong business account, but reimbursed the other business for the expense. How to handle the 1099 filing. So the 1099s would be issued from whichever entity is going to be taking the deduction. Because in an IRS audit, the IRS, even though the IRS can't disallow a deduction. If your client is audited, they're still going to try to be enforcing the 1099 rules and making sure that they're being followed, and potentially issuing penalties if 1099s were not issued. And so is what happens. And so the IRS is going to, so they have multiple businesses. So let's say the IRS picks a specific business to audit, and they're going to look through that and they're going to see the deduction being taken on the books. And they're going to say, okay, show me the 1099s for these contractors. And they'll have to show 1099s that are issued in the name and EIN of the business that took the deduction. And it's not necessarily the business that paid for the expense, but it's the business that took the deduction on their tax return. Hopefully that makes sense. Great. Okay, there are two different, another question. Business expenses paid with personal funds, but then added to the business books, right? Yeah, so you'd still send a 1099 from the business in that case. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really matter where the funds come from. It all is dependent on where the deduction is taken. Whatever business or whatever entity is going to take that deduction, it should have a 1099 to back up that deduction, basically. Let's see. When's the best procedure when a contractor, after the work is done and paid for, does not respond to multiple requests for a W-2? You probably mean a W-9 form, right? Which is up here, W-9. So best practices is not to pay. It's a little tricky because a lot of people will say, don't even pay them until you get a W-9. However, that's an illegal thing as well. You can't really withhold payment until you get a W-9. But that can be done where you can say, hey, I have this payment ready to send you. I just need your W-9. If they were to come and say, that's illegal, you need to send me payment regardless of W-9, that's true. And so you could get in some legal issues there. But it's pretty common to say, yeah, hey, I've got this payment, send me your W-9 and I'll send you the payment. And most people are willing to comply with that. So that's usually best practice, try to get that W-9. If it's now just too late and they haven't got that W-9 and they're not responding to a request for it, I would document all of that, all those requests and all that sort of stuff. And then in an IRS audit, if the IRS were to ask and say, why didn't you issue your 1099? You could say, here, I tried to, they wouldn't give me the information. You can send a 1099 without the taxpayer identification number, but that's going to generate a lot of notices from the IRS and create more hassle and more problem. And so even though you might want to comply and send something to the IRS, you're opening more of a can of worms by doing that. And so I personally don't do that just because it creates a bigger mess on the backside of things. So I just document that I tried to get the information, they wouldn't respond. And especially if you can say like that person's no longer a contractor or no longer doing any work, they maybe did some small amount of work or whatever and were gone. Generally, an IRS auditor is going to look at that and be understanding that you tried your best to do it. And especially if you can show that IRS auditor like, hey, we tried to get the information, they wouldn't respond. We changed our process, and going forward, now we get W-9s before we make payments. But an IRS auditor will look at that and say, okay, I recognize that you're improving, you've done better, and going forward, everything's right. For W-9s, yeah, certainly can make sense. So, all right, so those are W-9s. Now, there are two different 1099s that are heavily used, and that's the 1099 NEC, and this is the one we've mostly been talking about, where you have a contractor. This is non-employee compensation. So that's what the NEC stands for, is non-employee compensation, something issued to somebody that's not an employee. And it's a very simple, straightforward form where you put the payer's name, which is the business that's going to be taking the deduction, and the payer's tax identification number, so that business is usually EIN, then the recipient's tax ID number, the recipient's name and address and all their information. And then you just put in box 1 how much they were paid during the year. You don't include any expense reimbursements in that number. You just include what they were paid for as basically their compensation. And that's fairly simple. I've never really filled out any of these other ones. Sometimes we'll put the state name on their state and payer. Like you might put the state in box 6 as what state it related to. But generally, there's no withholdings or anything. I've never really seen much withholdings on 1099s or anything from clients. So that's the 1099 NEC. The other 1099 that's commonly issued is a 1099 miscellaneous. And pretty much the only thing I've used this form for is box 1 rents. So if a client is paying a landlord or paying someone rent, we'll issue them a 1099 with rents being. You don't send a 1099 NEC for rent. You send a 1099 miscellaneous. There's other things on here, but like I said, I hardly ever use these. I don't know that I've ever really, like I've never had a client pay royalties to someone, so we've never done a 1099 put royalties or anything else in there. So let's see. Okay, what if they use the old Form W-9? That's probably fine. I don't know how often these are updated. This says revised March 2024, but they look pretty similar to all the prior years. They don't really change them a whole ton. Maybe they make some different wording or something on them, but this has been a pretty standard W-9 form for years. It should be fine. Okay, so a question from Ann. My client paid their employee $630 for a doctor appointment reimbursement. It was outside of payroll. Does this employee need to be 1099 for the reimbursement? That should be through pay for a doctor appointment, pay their employee for a doctor appointment reimbursement. We would get into what's like a taxable fringe benefit versus not. And outside, yeah, they wouldn't, yeah, you can't 1099 an employee. It has to run through payroll. And a doctor appointment reimbursement would not be a tax-free fringe benefit. It would have to run through payroll. That would need to be through payroll. If you 1099 them, then they would have to report it as like a Schedule C or like other income on their tax return. And that also opens up like a whole can of worms because now they're going to pay income tax and employment taxes, and then they're going to feel like that they were misclassified. They can go to the IRS and cause all sorts of problems and say, hey, my employer gave me a 1099 and I'm a W-2. The IRS could see that there's a 1099 and W-2 issued in the same. So yeah, that's just going to create a lot of issues. So that should have just run through payroll as a fringe benefit, as a taxable fringe benefit to them. Do you send a 1099 miscellaneous for storage rent? Yeah, I would send it for any types of rents, because let's look at the instructions. And these are where I always go for questions, is that there's the instructions for 1099 miscellaneous and 1099 NEC. And if we look at rent in box 1, and so it says here, enter amounts of $600 or more for all types of rents, such as any of the following: real estate rentals paid for office space, machine rentals, pasture rentals. So yeah, they're saying even if you rent like machinery or a farmer paying for grazing land, like that would all go on a 1099 rent. So yeah, storage space would go there as well. All landlords required a 1099. Let's see here. This one had some additional Form 1099, but the real estate agent, let's see. However, you do not have to report these payments on form if you paid them to a real estate agent or property manager. But the real estate agent or property manager must issue the 1099 to report the rent paid over to the property owner. So it depends on who that rent's being paid to. If you're paying it to the landlord, to the property owner, then you would send the 1099 to them. Like my office here, we rent directly from the owner, so we're going to send them a 1099 miscellaneous. If, however, instead that property owner had hired a property manager to manage the property, and then we were sending our rent to a property manager, we would not send a 1099 to the property manager. It would be the property manager's responsibility to send a 1099 to the owner. And yeah, and those all go on 1099 miscellaneous under the rents there. All right. Okay, thanks for those questions. Let's see, another question. If a landlord was paid in rent, but also a membership payment, should the total amount get listed on the 1099 miscellaneous, or should the rent amount get It'll get added to the 1099. What kind of membership payment would be my question?
It's the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia. My client like rents a booth there and that's where she sells, but so she pays rent every month. But to also work within that market, the Reading Terminal Market charges all their sale retailers a mandatory $600 membership fee. So it's not technically a rent payment. She has to pay like membership dues to be part of the market as well.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I would just put the rent on the 1090. That's the actual for rent. The membership might be a 1099 NEC for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably split those between the two. The 1099 NEC is more for services, and that's like a service. They're providing a service because it's a membership that then matches them and brings them business, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in that case, I'd do a 1099 NEC for the membership and then a 1099 miscellaneous for the rent portion.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see. Cheryl had a question. Business owners pay their over 18 kids for work. Do they get a 1099? What about if they're under 18? I actually did a YouTube video on this. If you're not aware, I have a YouTube channel where I like all these questions that always come up. I'm doing lots of videos on just misunderstandings of things, and that's a huge misunderstanding. So I did an entire YouTube video on that recently. You don't want to 1099 kids regardless of how old they are. If you do it when they're under 18, so paying kids, you want them to be on payroll. The whole benefit of paying kids is that they are W-2 on a formal payroll. Because when that happens, their filing threshold is based on the standard deduction, which is like around what, $14,000 now. If I pull it up, yeah, about 14,006 in 2024 and higher than that for 2025. So yeah, they don't have to file a personal tax return if their earned income is under that $14,600 threshold. And yeah, there's no income tax on it. There's no employment taxes because that's taken care of at the W-2 level. If they're employed properly, then there's no even payroll taxes or anything that's withheld. However, if they are 1099'd, the threshold for filing a tax return for 1099 income is $400. If you pay them $400 or more and it's not W-2, not employment income, they now have to file a tax return and pay payroll taxes on that income. They won't be subject to income taxes unless they're above the standard deduction, that 14,600, but they will be subject to payroll taxes. So you really don't ever want to 1099 a kid or a child, regardless of what their age is, if they're really an employee. It comes down to if they're an employee or an independent contractor. If they're an independent contractor, truly an independent contractor, then yes, you would 1099 them. But most often not, kids are employees, so you would W-2 them. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a really common misunderstanding with paying kids.
So the reason why they just paid them was they were doing like remodeling on like a property that they own, and the contractors didn't show up to do the demolition on it. So they would just grab their kids and they were like, get over to the property and start hauling trash kind of stuff. So that's, yeah, it only happened 2 times. And so I think it was just, if the contractors didn't show up, they just had their kids step in, but to the faults now with their kids doing this.
Yeah, yeah. So in that, I mean, the kids can still be employees of the business because they probably truly are employees because they're probably not bringing their own tools. They're being told by their parents what hours to work. They're being told by their parents how to work and how to do the job. Like they're not coming with as a true like independent contractor. They're under heavy control of their parents. And so they're probably more classified as employees rather than contractors in that instance. But if they really are contractors, you can give them a 1099. It's just they're going to have to file a tax return if their income is $400 or more in that case. So, and they'll have to pay all their own employment taxes and all that other sort of stuff. So yeah, the burden on it becomes a lot bigger that way. Let's see. Okay, we'll go back and cover some of these other questions. So let's see, just to confirm, the business completing the W-9 can add either their EIN or SSN if they're a sole proprietor. Okay, that's another kind of issue. I should do a YouTube video on this one too. So right here in the instructions to the W-9, it has, let's see here. I know it has I always have to find it. Certification. Let's see, where is that? Privacy Act notice. It has something about LLCs and single member LLCs. Technically, there was a huge loophole and the IRS closed that down. Let me just do a search for LLC. Oh, here we go. Check the appropriate box. Check only box line 3A. Individual or sole proprietor. Yeah, and then check the box for individual sole proprietor. Exemptions. Sorry, I'm trying to find that. It's always easy to find when you're not like in front of everybody. Let's see. Oh, taxpayer should be in here. So yeah, if you are a sole proprietor, you have an EIN, you may enter either your SSN or EIN. If you are a single member LLC that is disregarded as an entity, separate from its owner, enter the owner's SSN or EIN if the owner has one. If the LLC is classified as a corporation or partnership, enter the entity's EIN. Yeah, so there it allows the EIN to be entered. It used to be very specific where it said you must enter the owner's SSN because there used to be like this huge way of getting out of tax because basically like people could fill out this W-9 form and put the EIN of the business, and then the individual would file like a Schedule C and the IRS would have trouble like matching up the EINs and things. But yeah, based on these instructions here, yeah, single member, a sole proprietor can put either their EIN or SSN on there. Double checking that. Single member, enter the owners or EIN if the owner has one. Okay. So yeah, you can do that. Okay, so does the payment method matter when deciding who gets a 1099? Oh, that's a very good question. Thanks for asking that. Or when contractors paid by cash method. Yes, so that gets us into the 1099-K reporting requirements. So if you pay anyone by Venmo or by credit card, it's that company's responsibility to issue a 1099-K to them. And that's what these 1099-Ks are. And so that's what happens like on my side. Like we take credit cards. I get a lot of people paying by credit card. And so I get a 1099-K every year from the credit card company. If the people that paid me by credit card also sent me a 1099 NEC, I would now have two 1099s reporting the same income. So yeah, you want to avoid issuing a 1099 when a payment was received by credit card or Venmo. Zelle is a different one. Zelle, if I recall correctly, let's see if I do just a quick Google search, 1099. It says right here, Zelle does not issue 1099-Ks. Zelle does not view themselves as like a bank or anything like that. Zelle, they do not do 1099-K forms. It says Zelle does not issue 1099-K forms. So any payments done via Zelle will also need to be 1099 because that's just basically viewed as a bank transfer. Venmo will send 1099-Ks. Yeah, Venmo issues Form 1099-K to users who meet the IRS reporting threshold. So yeah, that's why it has to be a little tricky. You have to look up and see what type of method they used and see if that method, if that business, if that company will be issuing 1099-Ks or not. Zelle, I think, is the exception. Most other ones like PayPal and Venmo and other ones like that will issue 1099-Ks.
Only if it's Venmo business, not Venmo personal.
Yeah, that's the other challenge is that, yeah, it has to be Venmo business and not Venmo personal. So I guess you could look it up and see if it was done personally or done through the business, because if it's personal, then a 1099-K also would not be issued. So a regular 1099 should be issued in that case. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Now, couldn't it still be personal? If you use your personal, you have the selection for friends and family or business, you can still make it a business transaction within a personal account. So doesn't that, at least you can in PayPal. I'm assuming Venmo works probably relatively the same. Wouldn't they still issue 1099-K at that point?
They should if it's categorized business. And the Venmo one is interesting to me because the person that cuts my hair, I pay her via Venmo, and she's also a client, so I do her tax return. So I see both sides of that transaction. And when I pay her, I don't have the option to say it's a business or not. That's more on her side. But hers is it's like a personal Venmo. And so I see all of her transactions. She gets no 1099K, even though she's like above the threshold. And I don't know, I wouldn't 1099 her because the haircut's a personal expense and I don't deduct it as a business. So I'm not 1099 her anyway,
But I get what you mean. You're saying that it's not doing it that on your end. Okay.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I'd say if you're paying it via Venmo, it's the person that's receiving the Venmo, it's their responsibility, I guess, to make sure it's reported correctly, even though that's backwards, because generally it's the person that's paying it needs to make sure a 1099 is being issued. So yeah, hopefully the IRS kind of works through that, because the 1099K and Venmos and all that sort of stuff, it's a bit of a mess. And so yeah, they're trying to get that better. Okay. Question from Ann. My client purchased his business office with his personal funds. He took out a personal loan as having the business pay the personal loan. He's putting the loan payments to rent on the P&L, basically paying the client back. Does my client need a 1099 from their own business? Hopefully this makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to follow that. So client purchased business office with personal funds, and that's fine. He took out a personal loan as having the business pay the personal loan. He's putting the loan payments as rent. Okay. Got it. Yeah, so in that case, you would technically issue a 1099 from the business, because the business is deducting that as rent, and then it's going over to the owner. Yeah, they would 1099 it, and then the owner on their personal return, if they own that business personally, would then recognize the rent as income on there, and then they would do depreciation and all the expenses for the building that way. Yes, yeah, in that case, you would 1099 yourself, basically, for that as a 1099 miscellaneous. Okay, so question from Erica. So if your kids were paid but not as W-2, then do nothing. If they were paid not as W-2, then they would have to be 1099'd, and then they would have to file their own returns. It's best to have them set up on payroll. Yeah, I can't really say do nothing as a CPA. Most people, yes, I'd say in practicality, most people do nothing, but I can't really say to do nothing. So technically, there should be a 1099 issued and tax returns filed. If they're not paid as W-2, then they're a contractor. But it actually really comes down to, it's not really our determination. We can't just decide if they're a W-2 or they're a 1099. That's not us to really decide. We have to look at the facts and circumstances, and that dictates whether they're an employee or a 1099. So that's when we have to look at, I think I have that in here. Let's see. I'll just pull it up, IRS. This is like a quick, little kind of hack. If you put IRS in front of your Google searches, you'll get IRS results. So I put IRS in front of everything when I'm looking at tax stuff. So here's one that I looked at, IRS contractor versus employee. And so this goes down through what is a contractor versus employee, and it's behavioral, financial, and the type of relationship they have. And so you really have to look at, is this person legally an employee or are they legally a contractor? How do they fit within that law? My guess is that the kids were probably employees and not contractors. And so the payments to them, even though they didn't run through payroll, they're still employees and were paid as employees. So there might be some things that need to be taken care of there, maybe payroll tax returns filed or W-2s at least issued for those kids. Let's see. I have a client who hires students to help run his events. He can file 1099 and they're correct. Probably, yeah, that's the same question here is, what are they doing? What are they legally categorized as based on the behavioral, financial? And you can click on each of these because then it gives you more detail of behavioral control factors, type of instructions given, degree, evaluation systems, training, and it goes through all those. It's not like a simple thing of, oh, I didn't set them up on payroll, so I'll just 1099 them. It's like, what are they really? Is there financial control? Do they have a significant investment in what they're doing? Are their expenses reimbursed? Do they have opportunity for a profit or a loss? Are they the one that's setting the price when they come to you, or is the employer setting the price, the method of payment? So there's a lot of things that go into there, and there's not like any bright line, like you're an employee, you're an independent contractor. It's like kind of overall type thing. So that's what you have to look at there. with those students. They could be contractors, they might be employees. Okay, so why am I saying 400 at Switzerland? Okay, so there's two different things that are going on. The 1099 threshold is $600. So you issue a 1099 when you have $600. So if we do IRS filing requirements, this is where you need to file a tax return. And right here it says you have over $400 in net earnings from self-employment, side jobs, and other independent work. So that's where the $400 comes in. So even though you're not required to 1099 anybody unless you paid them $600 or more, if that person has received $400 or more in net earnings from self-employment, they are then required to file a personal tax return. So you could pay somebody $500, you're not required to 1099 them, but they're still required to file a tax return because they're over the $400 threshold. So that's where the $400 versus $600 threshold comes in. And so this is directly on the IRS side of who must file a return. Let's see, Cash App. Yeah, that's one you just have to Google because I'm not sure. And then for these, I always just put the name of the business and 1099, and it usually will pop up right there. For 2024 tax year, Cash App will report transactions on Form 1099-K. So Cash App will file 1099-Ks, so you don't have to report anything that's done through Cash App if it's done that way. So does it have to be sent from a business Venmo? That I don't know. I know on Venmo you can set up to be a receiver. Let's do Venmo business account and see what it has to say. As a profile, it can be added to an existing personal Venmo account after extra features for benefits. Yeah, you have a question? Okay, somebody muted for a second there. Yeah, that I don't know. I don't know if other people are more familiar with Venmo and how that works for businesses and things. I am not super familiar with it, but it sounds like you set up a personal Venmo first, and then you set up a business profile with Venmo. And I think Venmo's getting better at how to do that. I know a couple of years ago I looked deep into it, and I couldn't even figure out how to get Venmo to send a 1099-K to somebody if I wanted it to, and it was odd that way. Yeah.
Merrill, I had this question too, and I deleted it because we talked about it. Unless I'm misunderstanding, I believe that the 1099-K is only sent if the payments were made from a business Venmo account, not a personal Venmo account. So if they're paying from a personal Venmo account, no 1099-K will be issued. I don't think. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, and that's where it gets like foggy, right?
But then on that whole subject, I have another question because the threshold is $5,000, but if you paid them more than $600 but under $5,000, then a 1099-K isn't issued. So do you still issue a 1099?
Nope, it doesn't matter because they could be getting payments from other places that you don't know about.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people get tripped up over that where they're like, I didn't pay him more than, it doesn't matter. The rule is the rule because they could be, if they're a true contractor, they should be out doing work for other people, getting paid by other people. And they could hit that threshold through other people that you don't know about and you don't need to know about, right? Yeah. Yeah, so don't worry about that. Yeah, so this one's interesting because when I go in and get my hair cut, I just paid via personal Venmo. But what if I paid with my business accidentally, and now it's a personal transaction that shouldn't be issued a 1099, but Venmo, I don't know. That's where I think that's where this whole thing needs to be like solidified a little more. I'd say if it's a payment made from Venmo, maybe just say it was a Venmo payment and it's between Venmo and the person that got paid. Yeah. All right. All right, what if you already filed 1099s last year for your client and he paid through Venmo? Different threshold. Okay, 600K. Yeah. Yeah, so you're super on top of it and they paid your client, he paid through Venmo. So you could, you might contact the people that were paid and see if they're going to get 1099K, or I'd probably just leave it and see if they said anything and not do it the next year. The kind of ultimate way to correct it is that you would file a corrected 1099 with the IRS, and there's a box at the top of the 1099 that says corrected right here. So you'd file a 1099 with the corrected box marked, and just put 0 in there, and then the IRS would go through and correct that to 0. That's relying on IRS systems to do things right. And I tend to try to have as little contact and association with the IRS as possible because they really mess things up. And so I would personally, I would just leave it unless those contractors came and said, hey, you gave me a 1099, but I was paid via vendor. If they raise the issue, then I would say, okay, sorry about that. We'll issue a corrected 1099 and 0 that out. Otherwise, I would just leave it because it's going to create more problems with the IRS that way, if that makes sense. Yeah, different threshold for 1099K. Yeah, there is. And that's been changing. Let me find my 1099K screen. It used to be $20,000 for 2024. It's gone down to 5,000. And then starting this year, 2025, it's down to 2,500. And then it will go to $600 in calendar year 2026 and thereafter. They tried to push that straight to $600 a couple years ago, and everybody completely freaked out. And so they're phasing in the $600 threshold. And so they went down to 5,000 in 2024, and nobody freaked out too much. And now it's down to 2,500 in 2025. I haven't heard anybody freaking out too much. We'll see what happens in 2026 if people start to get nervous about that. We'll also see what happens this coming year with tax laws and things like that, because it's going to be a very busy year with new tax laws coming out. We're living under the tax laws that came out of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and all of those tax laws were set to, not all of them, but most of them were set to phase out at the end of this year, the end of 2025. And so there's a huge push for all new tax laws. And so we could see some changes to 1099K thresholds come out as part of that. So we'll keep an eye on that. Yeah, client. Let's see, if your client has a Venmo business account, does he still need to collect W-9 forms? No, because if you're making a payment through like credit card or something, yeah, you wouldn't need to worry about W-9 because you're not going to issue them a 1099. It's only if they were paid by like cash or check or something like that. So that's more on the business side, the person that's making those payments. So that person making the payments would know, okay, I'm paying this person in a cash or I'm paying this person in check. I know I'm going to have to 1099 them, so I better get a W-9 before I pay them, or try to get a W-9 before I pay them at least. Then, yeah, but if you're paying by credit card, yeah, or Venmo or something, then there's really no need to get a W-9 because you will not have to 1099 them.
And
Okay.
if you do, I guess a follow-up to that question, if he does a mix of like credit card or Venmo and checks, we would only file the 1099 for the amounts paid by the checks, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, just to make it more fun, right? Now you got to figure out how they were all paid and what that looks like. Yeah, makes it fun. All right. Thanks for the questions. All right. And then Eric, if you receive a W-9 info after the filing deadline, do you still send the 1099 if so are penalties incurred for the issuer? So we always do. Like I have my bookkeepers, the staff on that side are the ones that do the 1099s. I don't get involved in them as much, but I'll sometimes log into our account that does it. I had the track 1099. I guess it used to formerly be track 1099. I think that's what is mainly used in the group here. We use the one, it's similar, it's called tax 1099. I use that one. I logged into that one from time to time, and sometimes I'll see that our bookkeepers sent 1099s out in the middle of the year or late in the year or whenever it was. So yeah, we always try to issue those 1099s. Now, if it gets to be like 2 or 3 years, like at this point, I wouldn't go back and do 1099s for the 2023 tax year. That's just way too far back to deal with that. Again, if we were audited by the IRS, we'd say, oh yeah, there were those, we missed them. We got a better system, and starting in 2024 going forward, we're taking care of all those. And so, but yeah, if they pop up during the year, they pop up all during tax season, we always file those. I've never once been assessed penalties for late filing any 1099s. I've never seen penalties. Clients have never said anything about penalties. They just never come up. I think those penalties are only there if the client gets audited and hasn't issued 1099s, and for some reason that auditor wants to be mean and issue the penalties. But In the IRS audits I've dealt with, and in just day-to-day business, I've never once seen it. Actually, I take that back. I did see penalties once for 1099s, but that's because the client filed hundreds of them and they were supposed to be e-filed, and they filed them by paper, and the IRS sent them a penalty for $100,000. And that's the only time I've ever seen a penalty, is because they didn't e-file them, they paper filed them, and the IRS hit them with a penalty. Other than that, I've never seen a late filing penalty on 1099s. So they don't need a 1099K if they don't meet the 5K threshold, but they would need a 10. No, yeah, if they're paid by credit card, Venmo, like any of those places that issue a 1099K, you don't 1099 them regardless of how much you paid them. So even if you're under that $5,000 threshold, it doesn't matter, because yeah, like we mentioned, they might be getting paid from other people, and if they're a true contractor, they would be being paid from other people. And so even though you might only pay them $1,000, they might be getting paid $10,000 or $20,000 or 40, in some other amount from somewhere else. And so in that case, your payment would go on a 1099K. It would just be added to all those other payments. So when I get a 1099K, I get one 1099K from my credit card processing company, and that has all the clients that have paid me during the year by credit card are included in that one 1099K. I would hit them with a penalty. Let's see. How late is it too late in the year to send a 1099? That's, yeah, just going to be a personal type thing. Technically, you should send a 1099 no matter how long it is, even if it's like years later. That tends to just open up more can of worms on things. And so generally for us, it's if there's still kind of tax seasons going on, like still deadlines coming up. So usually by maybe September, October, I'd have to look and see in my system what's the latest we sent out 1099s before. I guess I don't necessarily have a personal policy on it. I let my bookkeepers decide and send things out. But the problem is, it goes back to, okay, the IRS isn't necessarily going to disallow a deduction. There might be a penalty they impose for that. But even in IRS audits that I've been through, when the IRS has said, okay, where's the 1099s? And we say we didn't issue them, then they'll say, okay, can you issue them? And then sometimes we have, and sometimes we said we don't have the information. But usually if we can say, hey, that year was just rough. Like the client was figuring things out. We were just getting engaged with them. They didn't really know. Ever since that year, we've got them set up on a better system going forward. If the IRS sees that you're not doing 1099s at all over multiple years, that's when they're going to be a little harder. But if you can show like this intent to be like good and comply, then they're a little more forgiving. Say, okay, yeah, we recognize that year was rough. Going forward, you're good. Okay, just make sure to be on top of that going forward. So, yeah, if that makes sense. Let's see if there's anything. 1099Ks we went through. A lot of 1099Ks. Yeah, this is another like IRS reporting payments to independent contractors. There. The instructions are really like a wealth of information there. Oh, and then here's where it says right in the instructions about 1099K. Payments made with a credit card or payment card and certain other types of payments, including third-party network transactions. So that would be like the Venmo and PayPal would be considered these third-party network transactions, must be reported on Form 1099K by the payment settlement entity under this code section 6050W and are not subject to reporting on Form 1099 miscellaneous. There's also the same language in the 1099 NEC field. Let me find that here. 1099K. Oh, right here. Yeah. Form 1099K. Yeah. Report on Form 1099 NEC as well. That's how these instructions work. So if you're looking at these instructions, it says instructions for 1099 miscellaneous and 1099 NEC. The top of it is all the instructions for 1099 miscellaneous. And then as you scroll down, you get to somewhere down here, you get to the specific instructions for the 1099 NEC right here. Just something to keep in mind, they have this separated in there. Let's see, in Keeper, there's a place for vendors to check yes or no for e-filing consent if they're not uploading W-9. Does that mean we have to send a paper one? Okay, let me think. There's a place for vendors to check yes or no for e-filing consent. They're not uploading the W-9 through Keeper where they're giving up permission to e-file. I am not familiar with Keeper and how that all works. Where they're giving up permission to e-file, not uploading. Does that mean we have to? It's an IRS requirement to e-file those, and if you don't e-file them, you'll get hit with a penalty. I'm not sure how the whole consent thing and all that sort of works, but I would e-file every form to avoid those penalties. Because yeah, like I said, the IRS will issue penalties if you paper file and you're supposed to e-file. Oh, and then I'll talk about foreign contractors as well. That one comes up quite a bit. So if you have somebody that's outside of the US, then if they fill out this W-8-BEN, it's them certifying that they have a foreign status and they don't have a connection to the US. It says down in here, the form relates to income not effectively connected. And they're basically saying that they're earning income, they're not a US person, they don't have any connection to the US, therefore they should not be basically 1099. And so if you have this W-8-BEN on file, if the IRS were to audit that client and say, why didn't you issue a 1099? You can show the W-8-BEN and say they're a foreign person. We don't have to 1099 them in that sort of case. W-9, we can look at that real quick. Basically how that gets filled out. It's pretty straightforward. So this one is basically the name that will be on the tax return that's being filed. So it says here, for a sole proprietor or disregarded entity, enter the owner's name on line 1 and enter the business/disregard entity name on line 2. So if this is like a single member LLC, a sole proprietor, they're filing a Schedule C, they would put their name here because the IRS wants to match the name with the tax return. And so their name there, and then their business name would go there. Or if it's like an S Corp or partnership or something like that's not a sole proprietor, and then they just put their business name there. Then on here, they either mark they're an individual, sole proprietor, a C Corp, S Corp, partnership, trust, or estate, or they can mark that they're an LLC, and then they have to put how they're taxed, because an LLC doesn't really exist for tax purposes. An LLC is either a C corporation, an S corporation, or a partnership, or a sole proprietor. So if they're a sole proprietor, they would mark that box there. It says no, check the LLC box above, and in the entry space, put the appropriate, unless it's a disregarded entity. A disregarded entity should instead check the appropriate box for the tax classification of its owner. And so, yeah, that all goes there.
Merrill, can I make a comment about this? I really don't like the new W-9 form because it's so confusing. I had a vendor fill out a W-9. She's an LLC, as was I for 2024, but filed as an individual sole proprietor. But the new boxes make it look like that if you're an LLC, but you haven't become a C Corp or S Corp, you mark LLC. Do you get what I'm saying? Like they don't realize, so you're an LLC, but you're filing as a sole prop, but they don't, so how do you get around that? Because if they mark LLC, but then don't say a C, S, or a P, then do you just consider them an individual?
Yeah, because if they don't mark what they are, if they just say LLC, yeah, then I would probably assume that they're individual sole proprietor in that sort of a case, because yeah, they're not designating what they are. So, and they probably mark up here if they were one of those. So yeah, I'd say they're probably individual sole proprietor, but I can see how that is confusing. And it's just the way that the IRS set up LLCs, they set themselves up to be confusing. Because, yeah, when LLCs were invented, the IRS didn't know how to treat them either. And then they came up with this weird system where LLCs don't exist, but they have to file as one of 4 different ways. And so,
Okay, perfect. Like I said, I just was confused because the new form actually makes less sense than the older form.
right. Yeah, definitely. Okay, no, yeah, so good question. So you don't file a 1099 for an S Corp. So yeah, so if somebody marks a C corporation, an S corporation, or they mark LLC and put C or S over here, you don't issue them a 1099 unless they are an attorney. And then attorneys always get 1099s for some reason, then you would. But yeah, S and C corporations do not get issued 1099s. All right. Any other questions? Our lawyers and you're paying them That attorney's always, so yeah, so as long as they're over 600, yeah, you do it an NEC. It's a little confusing because on this 1099 miscellaneous, there's gross proceeds paid to an attorney, but that's like settlements and stuff so I have a number of attorney clients and they get these 1099 miscellaneous with the gross proceeds paid to the attorney. That never comes from business owners. Those always come from like, it's the court system, or I'm not sure. Somebody is required to send, like it's an odd thing with attorneys because when they get a settlement, they get 1099 for that entire settlement amount. So if you hire an attorney and they negotiate, say, $1 million settlement with a company, the attorney is the one that gets $1 million 1099 for that settlement, even though that attorney is going to pay a certain percentage of that settlement to you. Let's say it's percent, right? Because they always keep some portion of it. And so let's say that they get the $1 million settlement, they get a 1099 for $1 million. That's what gets reported on this 1099 miscellaneous. The 1099 NEC is for what our clients would do. So we're not doing gross proceeds paid to an attorney. We're just paying them as part of a business. So it would go on a non-employee compensation. I've never done a 1099 miscellaneous to an attorney. I've always just 1099 NEC to them because that's where that belongs. Yeah, and they'll get that regardless of the amount. Yeah, if that's over $600, they'll be 1099 for that. Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Oh, we got one more, looks like.
Yeah, is there another question? Oh, let's see here. So for lawyers, 1099 NEC is fine, and we still 1099 them no matter what. Right, yeah. Lawyers 1099 NEC is fine. 1099 them regardless of whether they're a corporation or not, and you would just 1099 them if they're paid $600 or more. If they're under 600, then they wouldn't. So yeah.
Yeah. And Debbie, yes, there is a replay, so it's live on the page, so you can go back and catch that at any time, or it'll be uploaded to YouTube. So you'll be able to catch it either one of those places.
Yeah, and I'm around in the group too, so if there's
Yeah, feel free to ask.
I should say when there's questions that come up, let me know. Yeah.
Yep. Feel free to ask questions.
Yeah. What other forms get filed with 1099s? That I don't know of other forms. Like you've just filed 1099s on there. There's a 1099, and then back in the day when they were paper filed, you would fill out like a 1096 that would go in front, and then the 1099s behind. Now that they're just all e-filed through online, then it's just the 1099 gets filed. Whatever other forms get filed with that, yeah, that's up to the e-filing side. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for this. This was great as always. We appreciate it. And y'all, if y'all have any questions, definitely post them in the group. Y'all can tag us. We can get Merrill to answer them. Tag him either way. And he's always super helpful with that.
Yeah.
All
Thanks.
right.
Good to be here.
You're welcome. Thank y'all. Hope everybody has a great week. Bye.
See ya.